Hello everybody, it's Brian and I'm back with more Fusion 360. Today we are continuing our exploration of the Loft feature, and I'm actually quite excited about the example I'm going to do. In the past when I've taught lofts, I haven't spent a ton of time on them. I've showed people how to make them, the idea of creating different profiles on different planes, but I've always lacked a kind of real-world example. But looking around my house the other day, I came across a loft in the wild. And so that's what we're going to draw today. We're in the middle of the COVID-19 crisis. We have to wash our hands a lot. Our hands get dry. And so there's this lovely lotion bottle sitting next to the sink so we can moisturize our hands. And it is, as I look at it, the perfect example for how to draw an object using lofting. So that's the example we're going to use. I'm going to duplicate a lot of other processes we've used up until this point. So some of this will be good review, and some of this will be entirely new. So I think it's a fun example. The end result is a bottle that has a very complicated geometry that would be hard to draw pretty much any other way. So let's go ahead and get started with this. I'm working off of a real-world example, so I'm going to follow my own advice, and I am going to use an image that I've taken with my cell phone camera. So here it is. Put it on my desktop. I'm going to stick it on my front face here. I want to make sure it's selectable. Everything else I can kind of deal with later, as long as it's selectable. I'm going to create a new sketch on that same plane, and we can kind of zoom in here and take a look. Alright, so first thing I'm going to do, click on the image, right click, edit canvas. It's backwards, which will drive me nutters, so I'm going to flip it around horizontally, there we go, and I'm going to move it off and away from the origin point just because I don't want that origin to be in the way. That looks good. And let's zoom in here a little bit more. Again, I took it with my cell phone camera. I did a pretty good job of making sure it was vertical, but it's probably a little bit off of exactly vertical, and that will help me if I'm drawing precisely vertical and horizontal. So I've drawn in a reference line here that is a horizontal line. I'm going to position it right along the top of the bottle as a reference line, come back to my image, right click, edit canvas. This time I'm going to select the rotation component here, and I don't know, let's see, 0.5, not quite enough. Let's try 0.8. Oh, that looks pretty good. Yep, so there's my reference line. I'm just touching it. If I wanted to, I could rotate it another maybe 0.1 degree. Probably not worth it. So my reference line is done. I can go ahead and delete that and go back to my image. So there we go. We have a rotated image. We're set to start to draw on it. Now, my next step here is actually to, again, like we've done before, I want to make sure that this is the appropriate relative scale for the lotion bottle, and I don't know how big the image came in, so this time I'm going to right click and I'm going to calibrate, and I'm going to click the two widest points, and I took a measurement with my calipers, and I found that from this point to this point should be 62 millimeters. So right now this point to this point is 7.5 millimeters, so this is a little small, so we're going to make that 62, and that's going to enlarge my image a ton. And one more time, there's my origin point. I'd like to get it away from the origin point, so I'm going to edit my canvas. I'm going to kind of shift this guy over and up a little bit. Okay, so now we're still active in that sketch. So that sketch that I have is going to be my first sketch. And I'm going to do something that I have not done before. I am going to create, for kind of lack of a better term, an armature that I'm going to draw on. If you remember how to approach a loft, we need to have several different profiles on several different planes. all of my planes are parallel to one another. So there's a plane down here at the base of the bottle. There's kind of two here that I'm going to use that form this cylinder. There's another one here that's going to be a loft between this cylinder and this larger cylinder. And then there's one way up here at the top where we've taken this round tube and we've kind of folded it on itself to make this flattened edge, right? So there's another plane going to be here with a new profile. And then that's just extruded straight up to create this top part. So I need several planes, and I want them all to fall along this drawing somewhere, and I'll show you how we're going to do that. But I also want to be sure that the size and scale of things is appropriate for the drawing. And so what the armature is going to do is it's going to allow me to essentially just draw in a quick sketch that references this image, and then all of my later geometry is going to be based on that sketch. That allows me to change stuff very easily, and it's a very quick way of making sure that I keep everything proportionally scaled. So let's go about doing that now. I'm going to go ahead and draw a line right, same way I did before. I'm going to start right at this very top, from there to there. And this is important because I'm going to actually find the midpoint of my object based on the midpoint of this line. So I'm going to create another line from there, find the midpoint, and this is going to allow me to kind of find the middle of my object. I'm going to bring that guy all the way down to there, and that's going to bisect my object. Now what I'm going to do is from the midpoint over, I'm going to draw several lines at these plane lines where I want my different profiles, and then I can just reference this geometry as I draw. Alright, so let's go ahead and drop in the rest of these reference lines. So I'm going to go back to my line tool. Now I'm going to start to really zoom in here on my image, and I'm going to start at my midpoint line and bring it over, making sure that I'm perpendicular to the surface. One of the things you have to remember is you're getting some parallax from the image, and so the image seems like it's dropping away at this point, so I have to kind of reference where this point is in space a little bit. So again, we're trying to capture the overall look of the geometry, so I'm not going to be too crazy about this. I'm coming all the way out to the edge of my threads here. I want to make sure I have enough material to actually cut in those threads. And I'm going to do that again from this point to the edge of the threads. And here I'm going to reference this point. So you'll see I'm getting that projection line up, and that makes sure that that's a complete cylinder. Okay. And I'm going to create another point at this line here. And again, I'm going to come all the way over to the edge of the bottle for that. So these start to become those planes. There's a plane here, there's a plane here, there's a plane here, there's a plane here, that I'm going to draw those profiles that I loft. It's going to kind of be magic when this all happens. At least I think it is. All right, and then we have one more that's going to be the top point here. Right around there. And we will come over and we'll reference you. There we go. Good. So there's my skeletal system. So that's my sketch. I'm going to go ahead and finish the sketch. You'll see it's not at all black. Nothing is defined. It's all sort of floating in space, but it is based on that sketch. So I'm pretty confident that from a geometry perspective, we're good to go. So at this stage, the image is going to get in my way. I have a pretty good sense of how I'm going to approach this. So I'm going to turn that off. So I'm going to come over here to my browser, go to Canvases, turn off the eyeball. And now I'm ready to kind of go forth and start to draw. Now, at each one of these lines, I need to create a plane. And so I'm going to use that plane at angle construction tool. So I'm going to go to Construct, Plane at Angle, and I'm going to, let's start down here at the bottom. Here's my plane. And I don't need to adjust the angle because it's already creating a flat plane, because it's referencing the plane that that line was drawn on which was the top. Oh, no, that's not true. Anyway, it's choosing this top view of the plane, which is the one I want. So I'm going to click OK for that. All right. Once I do that, I am going to go ahead and create a sketch on that plane. And I have to bring this geometry into that plane. So I have to go to Create, Project, Include, Project, and I want to project that guy onto that plane. There we go. And now I'm going to draw a circle from the center point to that point. And that's it. That's my sketch. Now I'm going to do that exact same thing at this next line. So I'm going to rotate around here so we can see what's going on. Construct, whoops, not that one. Construct a plane at angle. There's my line. It creates that plane through that line. That looks good. Okay, create a sketch on that plane. Where'd you go, image? Okay, we'll go back to our home view there. We lost it there for a sec. Okay, here we go. We're on that plane. I want to create, project, include, project that line. Okay, it's giving me those points. Those are the critical things I need. Circle, center point, end point. Finish sketch. Do that again. Create a, oh, nope, I need a plane before I can create a sketch. Construct, plane at angle, this line, that's good. Create a sketch on this plane. Go back to my home view, there we go. Create, project, include, project this line. Circle, center point, end point, finish sketch. See a pattern emerging here. We have to do that one more circular profile, which is the very end of the tube before it starts to squirt down into the part where you squirt it out down here. So again, construct, plane at angle. Here's my line. 0 degrees to that line is good. Create a sketch on that plane. Go back to my home view, zoom in here. Create, project, include, project. Talk about repetition, learning how to do this. I'm going to create another circle. Center point of the circle is there. And there we have my circle. Okay, finish the sketch. Okay, we have one more profile we have to build. It is the top of my object, but this time it is not going to be a circle because we flattened that tube. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a rectangle at a plane that goes through this line, and that rectangle is actually going to be this length, so it comes out to here, right, because I referenced that, and then I took my calipers and I measured the width of that rectangle. It's about 1.5 millimeters wide. So we'll do that next. So construct, plane at angle, through this line. That looks good. Create a sketch on that plane. This time I'm going to kind of leave myself in that view. Create rectangle, center rectangle, because again I want to reference. Oh, I can't do that because I have to project that line. That's what I forgot. Geez, you'd think after doing it 5 times in a row, we know how to do this. Project, include, I need to project this line. Okay. Then we're going to go to create rectangle, center rectangle. From there, I want to reference that point. There we go. Sketch dimension. So here's the first time I'm adding a dimension to a sketch. The only other time I dimensioned something was the width of the lotion bottle, and that was a reference dimension. All right, so you see as I shrunk that, it shrunk my whole rectangle. I want this point to be in line with this point, so I'm going to use a constraint for that. So I'm going to click, I don't know, that point, hold down Shift, click that endpoint, and I'm going to make them horizontal or vertical to one another. That locks the end of my rectangle to that line. This actually is a fully defined sketch because it lands on a point. That point is based in space. So that's it. That's my sketch. All right. So we have everything we need. And so I'm going to turn back on my canvas so you can kind of understand. We'll go back to our home view here. You can kind of understand what I've done here. Here's my canvas. If we line up on the front view of my canvas, you can see these circles kind of like go through those points. And I have a rectangle up here that goes through those points. So the first thing I'm going to do is I am going to extrude this rectangle up to this line. That's my first step. After that, the rest of the object is going to be made from lofts. Okay, so let's do that next. So I'm going to go back to my home view so I can see what's going on here. And we're going to extrude this profile. We're going to extrude it up. Extent distance to an object. I'm going to choose that point, and it's going to extrude that up. That's it. That's my extrusion. So that finishes off, that's that flat part of the tube. Now I'm going to create lofts from the bottom edge of this to this big circle. That's going to make that's actually the coolest loft of all of them. So I'm going to rotate around so I can kind of see what's going on here. Create loft from here to there. That's the cool one. Because it's making the round go into that flat rectangle. The only weird thing about this is it's starting with these 2 points here, and so I'm actually going to go in and adjust these guys so that these 2 points fall on that center point, so that my tube is completely round at the bottom. And I'm going to do the same thing over here. Okay, so that cleans up that loft a little bit. And now I don't want to add another loft profile, because what it's going to do is it's going to create a tangency around this point, and my tube's going to get really funny. So I'll show you if I actually choose another point. See how my tube has that funny shape? And I could just do, oh, that doesn't work. That doesn't work. Now it gets this really bloated profile. So I don't want to do that. I'm going to go ahead and delete that third profile. That's the shape of the tube. And so the other ones are going to be independent lofts. Okay. So I finished that loft. I just clicked OK. And now I'm going to continue to loft this thing to create the rest of the tube shape. Loft that surface to that surface. Good. Again, I don't want to continue down because it's going to do that same thing. So I click OK. Create loft from here to here. Good. That extends that out. And then one more loft. Create loft from there to there. Alright, let's turn off my canvas so we can see that we do in fact have this thing. And hopefully this is like a recognizable shape. If you walk down the store aisle, you will see this shape looking back at you in lots of ways, because it's a very common way of manufacturing things, taking a round tube and squeezing the end and heat sealing it to have liquid inside of here. All right, so this looks pretty good, but it doesn't quite look like my object. My object has some threads down here. My object is also hollow. This is a solid object. It also has that crimping up at the top, so if I turn my canvas back on, you can kind of zoom in here. You can kind of see the crimping that happens up on this top line on my bottle. So I want to start to add a little detail to this to clean it up so that I can more accurately reflect the geometry that I'm trying to make. So let's turn off our canvas one more time. And I am going to tackle the threads next. again, I'm just trying to capture the idea of the geometry. I'm not trying to capture the exact threading. Obviously, if you're engineering this to be made, you would have to capture the threading. But either way, Fusion has a tool for that. I'm going to go to Create, and I'm going to go to Thread. It's going to bring up my Thread menu, and it's asking me to select a face. So I actually want my threads on this cylinder. So I'm going to select that cylinder. I'm going to switch to Modeled, which takes up a little bit more computing power. But I have a good computer, so that's not going to be a big deal. If you don't model it, it just sort of like draws it in there. It gives you some shadow to make it look like it. If you model it, it actually like cuts the threads out of the object. Yeah, you can go from there. You can obviously adjust. This is going to pick, depending on your thread type, it's going to automatically pick a thread size appropriate to the existing geometry. So obviously that must have been close to 16 millimeters across there, and so it picked this 16 millimeter thread. If you can go in and adjust this, but you'll see actually what happens when you do that. The thread actually changes dependent on that. This is a really coarse thread, so this actually looks pretty appropriate for the image that I had of my lotion bottle. So this to me looks great. I'm going to go ahead and click OK. That provides those threads. And the other thing I want to show you is that that first skeleton or armature is there. And so if I go to sketches, that was my very first sketch. I can turn it on, and you can see that my armature exists. And because all of these points are referenced to my armature, I can make some adjustments in the moment to clean some things up if I start to get funny geometries here. So that point, these are all click and draggable, so I can squirt that in a little bit and it will start to change that interface. I can even move this line up and start to shrink the end of that tube just to make it look a little bit more like it looks like in real life. So you can squeak all these things around. I could squeeze this in a little bit, and that starts to soften those threads. You can see because it's now tapering that edge. Maybe that's a little bit too far, so I can come back out. There we go. So I can modify this, a little bit to just fine-tune some of these things and give it a more accurate representation. And that's all based on that skeleton, which I can turn on or off. All right, so good. My threads look pretty good. Now what I want to do is I want to hollow this thing out so it's actually a hollow tube. And right now there's no hole at the end to kind of squirt the stuff out of. So to do that, we're going to use another incredibly powerful tool called the shell tool. So the shell tool is right here. It's in your modify menu under shell. And when it says faces or body, it's actually asking you for the thing that you would like to remove. So I need to have the stuff squared out, so I have to remove this face to make it hollow. So I'm going to select that. I want to make the thickness about the thickness of the plastic. And instead of going inside, which because of these threads, it's going to start to make things problematic, stuff might become hollow, I'm actually going to go outside to do this, because if I don't, I'm going to make it, there we go, 0.1, there we go. If I don't, it could start to affect the thread. So I'm going to it just fattens everything up a little bit. Actually, let's make it 0.05 instead. We'll just give it a little bit of thick, very, very thin material here, just so the tube is pliable. And we'll click OK. And you'll see what happens there is it thickened up my geometry a tiny little bit. Because of these threads, I didn't want to end up creating any problems. And you'll see now my tube is hollow. And it has this shell all the way across here that makes my tube hollow. So what this is doing now is it is starting to really look like that tube that we wanted to create. last thing I want to do to this is I want to create a pattern on the end to make it look like it was crimped here. Again, just to drive home that this is a real object. That part is going to be pretty easy to do because I'm just trying to create a visual sense of that patterning. So I'm going to go ahead and create a new sketch starting on this very top edge, and I'm going to kind of come over here to the side, and let's look at this. Take a circle. I'm going to put the circle right on the edge here. These things are probably maybe 0.5 millimeters or so. Let's give this a dimension here. Let's make it 0.5. There we go. Maybe a little small. Maybe 0.8 was actually better. All right, so there's my sketch. I'm going to move it over a little bit. Again, I'm just trying to get the visual sense of where it is. I'm going to push it a little bit over here closer to the edge. There we go. Finish the sketch. I'm going to rotate around. I'm going to extrude this guy down onto the surface. If you look at that crimp, it doesn't go all the way down. There's actually a little flat spot at the bottom. So I'm going to do that. Again, this is just creating that visual. So that's the start of that crimping that I want to be all the way across this top surface. So now I'm going to create a pattern with that. Again, it's referencing one sketch with one extrude, so that's one feature. I'm going to now pattern that feature. So I'm going to go to rectangular pattern. It opens up this menu. I'll move this over so we can hopefully see more of this surface as we go. Objects to pattern. First of all, pattern type. I want to choose features. I don't think it defaults to features. You can do faces, bodies, features, or components. I'm going to do features. It's asked me to select the features. I'm going to come down here and I'm going to say I want this extrude. Right? So rather than select it here, I'm actually going to select it from my timeline. You can see it's highlighting that. Directions. So this is telling Fusion it needs a reference, typically an edge, to tell it which direction you want to pattern. If you want to pattern multiple directions, you have to give it two different directions. In this case, I only want to pattern along this edge, so I'm going to choose, I'm going to come down here to direction. I'm going to choose either this edge or this edge because they both run along that axis that I'm trying to pattern. Distance type. So I can either do an extent, so I can pattern up to a point. So I choose that. The extent could be here, or I can choose a spacing option. And we can start to pull this out and you can adjust the spacing. So this gives you a visual sense. 2 millimeters is probably too far away. So let's try to go maybe 1.5 millimeters. That looks good. And then how many do I want? You can switch over here and, oops, nope, wrong one, Brian. 1.5, there we go. And then these, we can up my quantity across here to make sure I go all the way across that surface. So you can see it's sort of putting in these phantom references. All right, so I'm happy with that. It's going to create those all the way across. I click OK, and that's going to create in that crimping material. But that only is doing it on one side. So guess what I'm going to do? I'm going to mirror that to the other side. So now there's that pattern that references all of those. I am going to go ahead and create a midplane between this face and this face. That's going to become the mirror line. Okay, and now I'm going to go in here, create a mirror, pattern type feature. I'm going to mirror my pattern, mirror plane here, and okay. And now what that's going to do is that's going to create that same pattern on both sides of my object. we have a lovely tube. With threads that is hollow inside. So, hopefully you get a sense of how powerful this tool can be, even if I'm not applying dimensions, to start to create visual identity in objects, right? So there you have it. There is my lotion tube using lofts and patterns. Thanks for tuning in. I will see you on the next tutorial.